This evening, we're going to be talking about moving forward together post-election 2020. For those of you that might not be aware, Living Room Conversations is an organization that was started 10 years ago. Joan Blades and I co-founded it as a way to build bridges across political divides. And there are now over 100 guides on various topics, and there have been thousands of living room conversations held all over the country. They offer a simple, sociable, and structured way to practice communicating across differences while also building understanding and relationships. Typically, 4 to 7 people will meet in person or over a video call for about 90 minutes to listen to and be heard by others on one of these hundreds of topics. Rather than debating or convincing others, we take turns talking to share, learn, and be curious. There's no preparation that's required, and through background links with balanced views are available on some topic pages online. This evening, you're seeing a hybrid version where we're going to be using a 60-minute time frame with our esteemed colleagues today. I'd like to invite my co-host for the evening, Justine Lee, to help kick us off for tonight.
Sounds great. Thanks, Amanda. I'm Justine Lee. I'm co-creator of Make America Dinner Again and also a partner at Living Room Conversations. Tonight's conversation is very exciting. We are kicking off 2 weeks of election-themed conversations that will make space to navigate feelings around the election and help us all move forward together, no matter the outcome. And we're inviting all of you who are tuning in tonight to join and host conversations in your communities this week and next week using Junto, a new video platform. So tonight's conversation, we hope, or will serve as a model, and you can follow along with the conversation guide that your wonderful live stream hosts will be dropping in the comments. Just so you know, there will be no Q&A with the participants, although that would have been fun. We're hoping that you will all treat tonight as though you were peeking through a window into a conversation. We're essentially inviting you to eavesdrop. And so with that, I thought we'd get started with introductions. And so introductions are just name, where you're calling from, what drew you to this conversation, and have you ever participated in a living room conversation?
Great, so I'll help kick us off. My name is Amanda Catherine Roman, and typically I am broadcasting from central New Jersey, but I am actually in Colorado this evening. I was drawn into the conversation tonight as a supporter and advisor to Living Room Conversations, and also because much of my work and my career has really been dedicated to helping people have better conversations and finding unlikely partners and common ground in unlikely places. So in addition to serving as a co-founder of Living Room Conversations, I also co-founded the Bridge Alliance and the Institute for Corporate Transformation. So I've had an opportunity to participate in a number of Living Room Conversations over the years, and I'm excited about this one tonight.
Great, and I'm happy to go next. So I'm Justine, I'm calling from New York City. I kind of already introduced myself. As co-creator of Make America Dinner Again, I have organized and facilitated, dozens of cross-aisle conversations. This bridging work is really important to me. I've been doing it for the past 4 years. So I've participated in living conversations, hosted many conversations, but I would say that it's rare that tonight I get to play both host and participant role, and I'm looking forward to being able to share some of my thoughts. Yeah.
Let's go next to Pedro.
My name is Pedro Silva. I'm a pastor at Boulder at First Congregational Church, United Church of Christ. And I've done a good number of living room conversations on a variety of topics, mostly a large portion on the race and ethnicity series as a contributor to that. And that's how I met John. And I'm drawn to it because I do think that most issues we've talked ourselves into, so we can talk ourselves out of it if we can just listen to one another and engage.
And perhaps next, let's go to Marianne. And we'll have you unmute, Marianne, so we can hear you. There you go.
I'm sorry. I'm Marianne Williamson, and I'm calling in from Washington, D.C. And I was drawn into this by Joan Blades, whose work I have long admired. I co-founded an organization called the Peace Alliance, where we held citizen circles for much the same kind of thing we're doing here. I've facilitated a lot of racial healing circles. So the whole notion that, as Gandhi said, the end is inherent in the means, that we can't create peace in the world unless we create peace among ourselves, has long been of interest to me, and I'm happy to be here tonight.
It's beautiful. Thank you. And Grover.
Hi, unmuted. Grover Norquist. I'm here in Washington, D.C. I run Americans for Tax Reform, try and work to maximize liberty in general. And I know this through Joan and as well as Ms. Roman. So delighted to be here and certainly participate in a lot of sort of transpartisan coalitions over the years where right and left get together, maybe for different reasons, but try and make a reform that people both can agree on, and with some success. Much of the criminal justice reform movement of the last 5-6 years has been just that kind of success. It would not have happened without cross-partisan, transpartisan cooperation and work.
Great. And John.
Yes, indeed. So my name is John Wood Jr. I am calling you guys from Los Angeles. Not from my living room, from a studio. Children have invaded my living room, so I had to find another option. And I'm drawn to this work. One, I have first of all, I have a great respect for Joan and for everybody on this call, because you're all individuals whose work I know at least a bit about and am fascinated by and respectful towards. And two, I believe that the foundation of a functioning democracy happens on the level of is the level of community, and that at the communal level, that's something that doesn't hang together unless the relationships that make up a community actually are glued together through some spirit of goodwill. And I think demonstrating that goodwill and dialogue that crosses categories of politics and identity is one way to make the norms of goodwill and empathy and respect in politics begin to scale up, begin to travel. And so I'm hopeful that we can help demonstrate that sort of spirit in action in the conversation here tonight.
Awesome. That's everyone, right? Yeah? Okay, great. So the next step or the next round is going over our conversation agreements. And I'll turn, so this is really important because it really sets the tone of the conversation. So Amanda and I are gonna read each agreement back and forth. There are 6 total. And the first one is, be curious and listen to understand. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. You might enjoy exploring how others' experiences have shaped their values and perspectives.
Show respect and suspend judgment. People tend to judge one another. Setting judgment aside opens you up to learning from others and makes them feel respected and appreciated. Try to truly listen without interruption or crosstalk.
Note any common ground as well as any differences. Look for areas of agreement or shared values that may arise and take an interest in the differing beliefs and opinions of others.
Be authentic and welcome that from others. Share what's important to you. Speak from your experience and be considerate of others who are doing the same.
Be purposeful and to the point. Do your best to keep your comments concise and relevant to the question you are answering. Be conscious of sharing airtime with other participants.
Own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of your participation and the conversation as a whole. Be proactive in getting yourself and others back on track if needed. Use an agreed upon signal like a timeout sign if you feel the agreements are not being honored. And before we started, just for the listeners, we did agree that if we need to nudge folks along because of the time, I'll be helping to guide the participants in that process. So that is how we are going to engage in the living room conversation. And I will make a note that when you hold a living room conversation yourself, this is a really critical step to take in the rounds of the living room conversation. And we truncated it a little bit here by Justine and I going back and forth for the sake of time, but typically we invite each participant to read one of the agreements in an in-person living room conversation. So let's move on to round one, Justine.
Sounds great. So in round one, we're really just getting to know each other. We have a set of 3 questions that you all can choose from, and each of you will take about a minute or 2 to answer one of these questions. So it's your choice. And the questions are, what are your hopes and concerns for your family, community, and or country? What would your best friend say about you? What sense of purpose, mission, or duty guides you in your life? And Amanda's just dropped the questions in the chat box in case you want to reference them. But yeah, just choose one in a minute or 2.
And it looks like John's ready to start.
Yeah.
Sure, not a problem. So what are my hopes and concerns for my my community and family, et cetera? Well, my concern is that for the communities that I'm a part of, for the country broadly speaking, and even for members of my own family, that we will find ourselves in a place to where our capacity to sort of be able to, our capacity to recognize the basic sort of human dignity that exists within folks, as a simple function of being present and being human in our society, is something that we become blind to because we are so convinced that our political affiliations and other categories of identity determine our value as people, that we forget how to feel a connection to folks across those differences. I should have said this when I introduced myself, but I work with an organization called Braver Angels, largest grassroots bipartisan group in America. I come from a family that is biracial and bipartisan. And I grew up sort of experiencing this thing where people from different cultures who I love dearly couldn't see what was good in each other oftentimes, because we're so hung up on the differences that existed on a superficial sort of, on a more surface sort of layer. And so my hope is that we rediscover kind of the ability to empathize with each other beyond some of these divisions, and that we rediscover the joy of that, because there's something deeply fulfilling in connecting with people when you have things in common, but particularly when you have to dig a little bit sometimes to find those commonalities. But those are muscles that we have to exercise to experience that joy.
Marianne?
I have deep concerns for my country. I have deep concerns about this election. I do believe there is a golden mean in American politics of common decency and dignity. There are high-minded principles on the left and high-minded principles on the right, high-minded conservative principles and high-minded liberal principles. President Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. And that's the way I grew up. I grew up in a Democratic liberal household, but all my uncles were conservatives and Republicans. And it was like, don't listen to your, my uncles would say, don't listen to your dad, kids, you'll never make any money. And my father would say, don't listen to your uncle's kids, they won't survive the revolution. And then my mother would say, who wants roast beef and who wants fish? I mean, it was never something that ripped apart the cords of our love for each other. And those are the levees that have fallen in this country. And I think that what's so important for us to remember is that the Hegelian thesis, the antithesis to synthesis between conservative and liberal is needed in this country. No one has a monopoly on the truth. And I believe that because conservatives and liberals have been so fighting each other, the real enemies of democracy have used that. That has made us vulnerable to serious enemies of democracy. Conservatives are not enemies of democracy. Liberals are not enemies of democracy. And both liberals and conservatives who have made it sound, demonize the other, have been tearing down the fabric of our democracy. I grew up at a time where it was understood there were racists and homophobes and anti-Semites and all the rest. But it was understood that neither major political party would ever give any of those people a serious megaphone. Those levees have begun to fall. And so, of course, I'm disturbed. And but I'm happy to be here because I believe that with conversations like this, being with people who share our dignity, who share our goodwill, but also know we might not agree with each other on everything, this is where the fabric gets rewoven. And I believe that this is the antidote to the hate that seeks to divide us now.
I guess I can go. I think right now, much of what Marianne said and what John said resonate with me, even coming from a background that has some complexities in terms of political sides and race and all those other things. But what's been resonating with me most recently, and this is in response to what sense of purpose, mission, or duty guides me in my life. There's a person in our congregation, she wrote an article recently about her husband passing. And when her husband died, people from the left and the right and the middle and all over the place came and they joined with her to help her heal and to work together and she saw a bright sunshiny day from that song that was a part of the story that she told. And I think that awareness that when people know what the issue is, people will come together to solve that issue, to heal that issue. And we have an infinite creative capacity. We could do it, but we can't seem to agree on what the issues are. And so part of what is driving me right now is helping to the best that I can to draw people in to see what the issues actually are. Because I think if we know that, then that inherent, I'll say God-given capacity, my context, will emerge and people will be drawn to it because by our nature, I think we're also creative and we seek opportunity to create. But when we can't figure out what we're creating for and with, then that same capacity turns on us and we create something destructive. And so my hope is that we can create something positive together by agreeing on what the issues actually are.
Yeah, Pedro, I resonate with that deeply with much of what everyone said, some aspects of it. And my start in career and in professional life was in a very partisan setting within the Republican Party. And one of the early lessons I learned often was that when you understand, as you're saying, Pedro, the issues, and we can kind of rehumanize the context, we can reconnect, Marianne, as you're saying, around a dinner table or around, a community gathering space, and we can remember that there's humanity in all of us, and that sometimes those boxes or those perspectives that often society tries to fit us into don't have those human elements. And so finding ways to look for alignment as opposed to agreement on necessarily every pathway forward, and reminding ourselves with care and compassion that our life experiences inform why we have an opinion about a particular topic. And so my sense of purpose has come out of that kind of partisan background into a more transpartisan space. Ultimately, now I feel like my sense of purpose is driven by helping to provide opportunities for people to come together and learn that about each other, and to really understand that those opportunities can create really beautiful things that we might not have seen before.
That's great. So I'm going to answer hopes and concerns as well, but kind of not in exactly the same thread as everyone else with this transpartisan, nonpartisan thing going on, which I also really believe in, of course. Lately, I felt really concerned about Trump's strong language around linking the coronavirus to China and therefore to Chinese people. And I am concerned that will lead to, or will continue to grow distrust and hate towards people who look like me. I'm concerned it will get worse after the election, and that blame will be cast on us as people for not only the pandemic, but also for any hits to the economy. So that's my concern. My hope is that the Asian American community continues to show up for itself and for other communities in need. I've observed really amazing Asian American leaders over the past, months and years, creating ways to look out for each other, to report the hate crimes and discrimination that has been happening, and to also build movements of solidarity with other minority and marginalized groups. I've participated in countless workshops webinars, conversations, book clubs, and these have all been led by Asian American folks, people who I think typically in my experience, like growing up, I observed to be more timid or more reserved or even apathetic about politics. So this has been really heartening for me to see that, you know, Asian Americans are eager to learn about our country's history, about our own heritage and role in perpetuating racism, and are questioning where we fit in this national dialogue on issues like race and immigration. So my hope is Asian Americans continue to carve their place in the country and take a more proactive role in their communities and in politics. And then that momentum just keeps going.
And I'll invite Grover to round us out with this round of.
Sure, Grover here. My sense of mission, goal, duty is to work to maximize liberty here in the United States, to give everybody the best opportunity to do whatever they want, to be left alone by other people or by the government. And that extends to the rest of the world when one has time and energy. Certainly, the better the United States is at certain things, the better example we are, the more helpful it is. When we do religious liberty well, we can go to other countries and say, try this, it's better than killing each other. But we got to get it right ourselves to begin with. And the other part is, it's not just enough to sort of say that freedom is important and people should be able to run their own lives and their own families. You need to organize to work with, in a democracy, a majority of people to get the laws to reflect a maximization of freedom for people, and to back off when sometimes people want to ban this, ban that, prohibit this, mandate this for everybody else for their own good. And that means working in coalition with a lot of different people, some of whom share your vision completely, some of whom are willing, see some of it and are willing to work with you, and others, it may be for completely different reasons, they're willing to. I worked with Ralph Nader on term limits, because we each thought that the more turnover there was in elected offices, the less there'd be sclerotic self-interest on the part of congressmen, senators, state legislators, mayors, presidents, and for different reasons, right and left, and vast majorities of the American people, not the politicians, thought it'd be a good idea to cycle politicians through, stick around for 6 to 8 years, and then go do something else, maybe not in government. So those sorts of opportunities where you can really build a coalition to make the government a little less dangerous and give people a little more breathing room.
Thank you, Grover.
Thank you.
And I'm going to keep moving us along into the next round. And I think we each expressed in a slightly different way the desire to work with different folks that are different from us. And I think one of the key things to keep in mind there is that you don't have to work with the same people all the time in these different coalitions and on these different issues that are taking place. And conversations are a really wonderful way for people to share their joys and challenges, their hopes and dreams, and their excitements and their concerns with one another. So with Living Room Conversations, we believe that in coming together with open minds and hearts, we are given the opportunity to relate to one another in new ways that build understanding as our shared humanity is revealed through our individual authenticity and unique life experiences. During this election season, our differences seem to be on display, but if we allow ourselves to suspend judgment and listen respectfully, common ground is often revealed, even across political differences. So we're going to share a few questions here, and we're going to invite everyone to take about 2 to 3 minutes to answer one. And as time allows, we may go into another round here. This will be the meat of our conversation this evening. I'm going to read them, and then Justine is going to type them into the box for us as well. So select one. How have you experienced polarization in the last few years? What, if anything, has changed your own behavior? It's the first question. Second question. What have you noticed about your feelings and behavior in relation to the upcoming election? What are you noticing in those around you? And what has surprised you? I guess these are more clusters of questions, I should say. The third cluster is, what values do you understand to be shared by all Americans? And how could these values contribute to moving forward together? And we can invite you. This can be a free flow. So whoever feels called to answer, we don't have to wait for Justine and I to call on you. If anyone feels compelled to start, go ahead.
Well, I think that when you talk about values that all Americans share, if there are values that all Americans share, I would tend to believe that a belief in liberty, a belief in equality, and a belief in justice, for that matter, would make it to the top of that list. And I guess the follow-up to that is, how can these values be leveraged towards creating a pathway towards a better future? I think that the thing to bear in mind is that, particularly when it comes to this, when it comes to the pairing of liberty and equality, that there's a way in which liberty can seem to sort of show up as a little bit more of a conspicuous value among conservatives, and Grover certainly spoke to that. And there are ways in which equality can seem to show up as a bit more of an obvious value on the left. The two sit in tension with each other in some sense, because on the one hand, liberties, it's freedom for us to be able to chart our own course in life, but that doesn't negate responsibility. Equality suggests that we all start off as holding equal value as human beings. That doesn't necessarily mean that all outcomes are equal in every metric. In order to make either of those two things meaningful, I think, to get back to what I said earlier, those things, the tension between those things becomes creative when there's a spirit of goodwill that exists between people, wherein we work together to safeguard those two values together, right? So we can maximize liberty and we can maximize equality only if in our liberty we are willing to stand up for the equal rights of others, and only if in standing up for the equal rights of others, we find ourselves willing to allow people to be individuals, nevertheless, to chart their own paths in life to the extent to which their passions take them in one direction or another, so long as a community and as a democracy, we're able to function together. So there's a constant push and pull in that. And if we trust each other, if we have a sense of civic friendship that exists between us as Americans, then we can navigate the tension between these values creatively and allow for justice to flourish in the midst of that. If there is not trust, though, then we seek to maximize one value at the expense of the other. And what winds up happening in that case is that all of the things that we hold sacred wind up coming undone. And so this is why goodwill is such an animating ethos to me. Without that, these distinctive American values, or these values we hold dear as Americans, don't have a foundation upon which to stand.
Amanda, go over here. I'd like to add that to that. I see a sense of liberty, a willingness that people should be free, that I should be free, that you should be free, is something that Americans agree on. And we should all be treated equally by the government to start with, and not expect that somebody, because they're richer or poorer or a different color, is going to be treated differently by the state in any way. And because these are fairly broadly held views by Americans, and immigrants who come here come because they're coming to a place like that, that they're not in opposition to it. They often understand America better than we do, because they've been to other places where some of those interests in liberty and equality before the law are not terribly well recognized in reality. I think this is why it's so important, because there's still arguments that we have. Listening to other people, what is it that they fear? If there was more liberty, what are they afraid that somehow someone would misuse it? Are there ways to address that? And the other is to take baby steps. I mean, let's take a look at some things that the First Step Act, which was criminal justice reform, is called the First Step Act because it's just the first step. It was a small baby step, but a very important one, because it took years to get there. When we were working on that issue of reducing the penalty, the 100-to-1 ratio for people who were arrested for possessing crack cocaine versus white powder cocaine, 100-to-1 ratio. And we got it down to, I think, 18-to-1. I'm not quite sure where 18 came from, but it was, it was better than 100-to-1. And that took years of getting people to feel comfortable that they wouldn't be yelled at for being pro crack cocaine if they did this. And we eventually got a unanimous vote in the House, unanimous, because that only passed because there was a U.S. House of Representatives, because there was a unanimous consent required. Any one person could have stood up and said no and been on TV that night as the anti-drug person and become famous. So getting that level of, and when I testified in Congress on this subject, it was interesting to see the Republicans and the Democrats all wanting to do this, but each one sort of kicking the other one under the table, saying, now, don't be throwing something to me when I cast my vote this way. And there was this truce found, and it was the first big step on criminal justice reform, and there are many smaller steps since, but listening to other people, finding out what they fear, whether it's they fear that voters won't understand what they did, or individuals fearing that something will be misused. Listening to other people, because there is so much agreement in the United States. If people talk to each other and find out what you're concerned about, what your hopes are, and maybe if we can't eat the whole whale at once, can we do it a piece at a time?
Yeah, I think that's very, I'll pick up there, because I think that's very emblematic of much of what I actually learned. I had the privilege of working with Grover at Americans for Tax Reform for a period of time. And one of the things that I saw him do in action all the time, and the folks that we worked with, was this notion of alignment and figuring out what are the elements of what we're talking about where we can find that level of agreement, and acknowledging that there are differences. And I think that speaks to, I think, some values that are shared by Americans, is that we do want to work together. We do want to find a way forward. And because we have, and I think social media and technology and globalization has all contributed to the fact that we don't have as many in-person conversations. Obviously, with the pandemic right now, there are some additional challenges with that. But this lack of getting together, sitting around a dinner table, going to a town square, meeting in a coffee shop, wherever the in-person connection has taken place, has been largely eliminated in many communities. And I think that's really what I think Americans in particular are looking for and value, is that sense of belonging and that sense of feeling connected in those ways. And so I think when we talk about how we all might move forward in the future, post-election, whatever the result may look like, it's looking for ways that not only us who are in positions and organizations, you heard a little bit about all of our backgrounds, but I believe anybody can do this. Who can you talk to in your community, in the circles that you move in, that might be a little bit different from you, or might have a different experience, and what might you learn from each other? And I think you'd be surprised if you go in with a spirit of curiosity. And I think that's another value that Americans largely do value, is a sense of curiosity and opportunity that leads to amazing things and transformational things can really take place. So I think it's up to all of us, no matter what our roles in life are and the various hats we wear as parents, as community members, as family members. I think that we can do that no matter where we are in America and who we are connected to. So I would encourage folks to do more of that.
Yeah, I actually wanted to piggyback on what you just said, Amanda, about us, anyone can pick up this work of connecting with fellow Americans. I'm really relatively new to this space. I started Make America Dinner Again with my friend Tria 4 years ago. And before that, I was doing marketing at a design firm and PR for tech companies. Like I was, I cared about their issues that I really cared about, but I was not out canvassing. I was not, volunteering for campaigns. I wasn't fully versed on all the different issues. I really just had the knowledge of U.S. history and how the government works from high school, and so I feel that my and Tria's story really shows that if you just have a will, if you just have something that, what we were feeling after 2016 and after Trump was elected was this feeling of like, how could this happen? We were shocked. We were in a bubble in San Francisco and we did not personally know anyone who voted for Trump. We couldn't really fathom it. All the polls were showing that Hillary was going to win, right? So we were just reeling. We were all in these, you know, it was a lot of negative emotions, but one emotion or feeling that kind of rose to the top was this feeling of like, we want to do something about these feelings. So we want to do something about feeling disconnected and just like seeing, you know, we had seen the vitriol, we'd seen the polarization, the divisiveness. And that's actually one of the questions is how have you observed the polarization in this country in the past few years? And we realized like, well, we want to, you know, what's something that we can actually do as two people? Well, we both had experience organizing events. Tria had been a wedding planner for 5 years. That's a lot of work bringing families together for a big day, right? And I had organized, you know, events for marketing events for my clients. And I just loved gathering people socially. And we just decided, let's organize a dinner and see what happens. Let's find 4 Trump voters and, 4 Trump voters, 4 Hillary voters, maybe some folks who voted third party, and see what happens. See if there's an opportunity to build understanding, because clearly what we were doing before was not working. We're talking over each other. No one's listening, nothing. It's madness. It's madness. Or at least it felt like madness. And so I feel like I've had a really unique vantage point over the past 4 years because I've facilitated these conversations. You know, my work has been in reducing polarization. And what I've learned from it is, or how it's changed my behavior, is that I'm a lot more careful with my language. I speak in a lot fewer absolutes, try to avoid using never or always. I question my ideas more. I ask myself, why do I think this? Do I really believe, is this something I really believe, or do I just believe because someone whose views I think I generally support is saying this, right? I'm just questioning myself more. I'll read multiple sources on an issue. I don't use terms like safe space anymore. I learned pretty early on that that's something that not, you know, some conservatives don't love. You know, this work of reducing polarization is really important to me, but it's also revealed to me that there are social issues that I care deeply about, like racial justice, like environmental justice, like rights of the disabled community, things like that, or and the environment is really big for me as well. And I feel that I've gotten a lot of pushback from folks, not a lot, I would say I've gotten a fair amount of pushback from folks on the left who say, why would you waste your time talking to folks on the right, you know, trying to understand conservative views when you should be spending more of your time on the front lines, like fighting for marginalized communities. And I hear that. And there are days when I really feel that way too, when I'm like, I'd rather be spending my energy on that work. But then still, like, over time, I feel like I've decided that both can coexist. I can be working to reduce polarization. I can be working to bridge divides, and also put a lot of my time and energy into specific issues that I really care about. They can coexist. And I just wish that more people could see it that way. Yeah, that's me.
I'd like to go back to what John was saying originally about liberty and equality and justice. And then you said, Grover, that you thought those ideals were broadly held by the majority of Americans, and that's why I'm concerned. I'm not so sure that's true anymore. I think America's lost the plot. And I think a lot of this has to do with the failure in our educational system. You know, we have 11 states that don't even require half a year of study in American civics and government and history. And so, as John Adams said, we need to revisit our first principles. I don't think that many Americans even know what those first principles are anymore. Most Americans, in fact, do not think in terms of liberty and equality and justice as those underlying ideals. And that's the problem, because the ideal is that we are many ethnicities, we are many cultures, we are many religions, we are many different kinds of people, but we are united by our common fealty to these principles. When you start there, then you take a conversation like liberty and equality and you say, okay, one person might say, I have the liberty, the Second Amendment, and I can have an AK-47. Somebody else says, well, I feel my liberty is impinged upon if I don't feel that I can drop my kid off at school and feel relatively safe that somebody won't take one of those guns into school. Somebody might say, my liberty is my financial liberty to have that factory, but somebody else says, yes, but the underlying principle is that we balance individual liberty with a concern for the common good. So yes, you have the financial and economic liberty to have that factory, but the concern for the common good means that if you are throwing toxic chemicals into that river that is a carcinogen for the people in the community, that's not okay. And I think one of the problems, Justine, even when you were talking, I think sometimes when and I'm on the left myself, and I care about environmental justice, and I care about all the things that you said that you care about, but I think all of us on the left as well as on the right, and I think the right in a way is better about this, they are more likely to bring up the American ideal. And if we talk about all of these things within the context of the American ideal, then by definition, we're talking about something that all of us need to care about. And the other last thing I want to mention about that is history. Americans need to know more about history. And when you talk about the Chinese, for instance, this issue of anti-Chinese fervor and the terrible damage it has done to people, this is way worse than calling something a Chinese virus. If you look at the immigration purges of the Chinese and things that happened, particularly in California and on the West Coast throughout our history. So I believe that's something all of us can do as Americans. I feel like a lot of Americans have an ignorance, just not that we're stupid, but too many Americans, I believe, are ignorant of American history. There are like books like American History for Dummies. And I think that if all of us reacquaint ourselves with the larger American ideals, then we can start the conversation, this is America and we believe in this. Then we can talk about it, which is the aspect, like I said, nobody has a monopoly on truth. One of the things I feel, and I feel this as a lefty, this left-right dichotomy, it's not black and white. Life's not like that. There are very intelligent conservatives who I don't agree with their conclusion, but they definitely deepened my understanding. It's an intellectual dumbing down. When you think you owe allegiance to your side of the aisle or your side of perspective, that's just not intelligent thinking. Intelligent thinking is, yeah, you have a good point. Like I said, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So that's what I believe. I believe all of us need to reacquaint ourselves with American history and with the real American ideals that are those on which we purport to stand. And within that, we can find much more common ground that goes beyond just our common humanity, but to the common ideals on which as Americans we stand. And Grover was right. Immigrants usually understand this more than the average American does, because what they had to study in order to pass their exams, in order to become citizens, is often much more either than the average American learned in school or remember from what we learned in the 7th grade.
So I guess I'm the last one. So I'm going to take a feeling question, which is, what have you noticed about your feelings and behavior in relation to the upcoming election? What are you noticing around you or in those around you, and what has surprised you? I think that in our country, we don't have deep education in terms of emotional intelligence. And so because we don't, we're in this state now where we're actually more in our feelings than we've ever been before. For generations, people had to, even when they thought about what they're going to eat, they had to go out and hunt it and gather it and do all these other things. And there was no real time for sitting there and being present with your feelings and your emotions and all the things that come up for us as humans. They've been buried down for a long time. And now you have people who have never had the liberty, if you will, to entertain their deepest feelings, their deepest desires, their deepest understandings of who they are. And as this arises to a level of consciousness, they don't know what to do with it. All they've known ever is to bury it deeply so I can hunt this animal or, do whatever it is that I have to do, which usually takes up most of our time. But now we have the space to do more of that. But we don't have the ability, we don't have the education, we don't have the training. And we take for granted that we should know how to do it. And we become embarrassed of saying, like, I'm emotionally ignorant. I have feelings and I don't know what they mean or what to do with them. And we don't have, I think that anytime you come with a new level of information, you have to have some type of way of creating space within yourself. For most people, it's spirituality, or there's some religion, or there's something that they can do to create space within themselves for the new things that arise up. And we haven't been able to deal with that. We don't know how to deal with that. And so polarization is just a way of making a container for certain, from my perspective, to make a container for certain feelings and go, this is what I'm supposed to feel when this happens. That part's taken care of. I put that in that box and now I'm going to throw it over here so I can get back to, whatever, Real Housewives. And so I think for myself, what I've been witnessing is that as new feelings arise, I have new feelings that are coming up in this context, and I've been witnessing them. And as I witness them, I've been paying more attention to how little other people are witnessing to their feelings and what's arising. And the embarrassment, which for me, embarrassment ties back to fear of survival. Because when you get embarrassed in old cultures, they're like, that means you did something, they put you out, and now your life is at risk. And people are still tied to that subconsciously. And so it's messing with us. And we're just looking for ways to survive. And that's where people are functioning. And what's surprising me about myself is when I feel like I've come to the capacity, if I don't make space for myself, I can feel that same survival instinct in myself trying to say, hey, this person's putting a risk to my survival. The last thing I'll say about it is, which I think is important to say, I just wrote this poem a couple of days ago out of a workshop that they were offering at our church. I wouldn't have written it otherwise. And it was about where I'm from. And part of it, I said, I'm from being a Black man in America, trying to learn to live without looking over my shoulder, because Black lives matter and absence from the body is presence with the Lord. And what I meant by that is that I shouldn't have to look over my shoulder. And true freedom is a world where I don't have to do that. But I have to first within myself say that I deserve that is my reality, and that no one can take that from me. And if they take my body, then they just set me free into a greater experience that I know not what it is. But that's freedom. And freedom for everyone is when people who look like me or Justine or John can walk through every space and not have to look over the shoulder. That's actually freedom for everyone, and so that's where I am with it.
Thank you so much. And I think that's a really beautiful way of closing out this round. So many beautiful experiences and expressions. So thank you to everyone for sharing that. Justine's going to bring us into round 3, which is an opportunity to reflect on the conversation.
Yeah, so this is our final round for the evening. I know this is really quick. We just have a few questions that you can choose from. Again, just choose one and take a couple minutes to answer. The questions are: what was most meaningful or valuable to you in this living room conversation? What learning or new understanding or common ground was found on the topic? How has this conversation changed your perception of anyone in the group, including yourself? And is there a next step you would like to take based upon the conversation you just had? Anyone like to get started?
I'll say what's meaningful for me. What's meaningful for me is that we're here and we're trying. And that I know that there are really millions of people all over America who are. There are people in the United States who only want to talk about what we've done right and has no listening for the things that we've done wrong. And we must look at those things. But there are, on the other side of the political spectrum, people today who only want to talk about what we've done wrong and have no listening for all the things that we've done right. And I think it's more like when you're in therapy, when you're looking at the things you've done wrong, but you've also got somebody there reminding you, you didn't do everything wrong. We've got to go deeper. We've got to look at some very dark shadows in our country, in our past and in our present, but with a love for our country. And that's I think, what is meaningful to me. We're all trying and we're clunky at it. I think we were clunky at it tonight. But we're all here. We all showed up. And I think particularly with this election and everything going on in the country, I do believe there's a real aspiration in America everywhere to get past this left-right dichotomy. That's not what's in danger. We've got democracy versus anti-democracy in our country today. And that's not about left, right, Republican, or Democrat. And I think a lot of people know that. That's what I'm moved by. That's what I think I saw here tonight, that we're at least here trying. I admire Joan and others of you who have brought us together. And I leave here, as I am every day, just more and more committed to keep going, to keep doing this we must have new conversations because we need a new country.
If I could add, there are a lot of perspectives, and I guess I would suggest that I didn't hear a right, left, us, them conversation here. I think this sort of effort is much more like a Venn diagram with a bunch of different circles. And what I try and work on when I'm trying to move the political agenda, the public discussion, is find the overlap on the Venn diagram, because there's that area in the center on a particular issue or issue set where there's a great deal of agreement, not on everything. It's smaller than not everybody agrees on everything, but there is this area. And if you focus on that, you can get actual agreement where people of principle for different reasons can agree to do the same thing. And you're not asking someone, I've got a really good idea that you hate, and you've got a really interesting idea that I hate. Why don't we each put them together and we can both pass something that we don't like? And we're going to have pizza with mushrooms and shards of glass, and we'll all be unhappy. Don't think that by talking to somebody else who disagrees with you on certain issues, that compromise means you're going to agree to something that you think is horrible, but rather look for that zone in the Venn diagram. And it's not two players, it's many, many, many players getting together. And it may be small to begin with, but you may find over time, the more you talk, that the overlap is larger than you thought it was. And then everybody walks away happy because they all achieved something they liked, not as much as they wanted, but progress. And everyone saw progress, and nobody thought they had to give away something that they held dear or accept something that they can't stand.
Politics is the art of compromise.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed both Grover and Marianne's excuse me, closing remarks. For me, it's just interesting to note that the common ground that I observed in the conversation here is sort of this, I think, this shared sense really with all of us that we need to sort of deepen our understanding of who we are as Americans, what that broader identity which we share consists of in terms of what are the things we hold sacred on the level of our shared values, while recognizing the sense that shared values do not necessarily imply agreement on every specific point of policy difference, right? But they give us sort of a larger framework within which to not only communicate, but to just sort of trust each other on a more basic level. And I think that there's a sense that kind of reschooling ourselves in terms of what that means, that's got to be a necessary part of what we treat as urgent in America today, because the political projects, the partisan projects, are given a great deal of urgency, and that's very much understandable. I mean, everybody is scrambling right now to do everything that they can do to make sure that, Trump wins or Biden wins, and that's as it should be. But part of the reason why we are in this state of emotional and psychological desperation for the future of the country is because we have not really been consciously tending to the deeper sorts of spiritual and cultural foundations of the stability of our society, which require real patience to till. And I'm a broken record on this, but it goes back to our relationships with each other. Our deeper shared values should set the stage for a trust that we have with one another that itself sets the context for intelligent conversations about policy that are open to compromise, because at the end of the day, it's okay to give a little to get a little, because we are not enemies, we are neighbors. And in being neighbors, there should be some opening for friendship or some basic level of trust. But right now in the United States of America, we're veering towards this place to where we act as if we're looking to try and sustain a situation where we can be neighbors and enemies at the same time. And the truth is that that is not a scenario that can play out for long.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. I think what I'll do is I'll kind of make a little bit of a hybrid of the first question and the last question in terms of what's meaningful. Whenever people gather together in this way. There's I'm gonna use a word I don't use often, but almost like entity. It's like there's a collective of the six of us and Chelsea witnessing it that is greater than each of us as individuals. And there's this excitement that comes from that, to hearing all these different ideas and saying, man, I wish I could go a little further with that one and a little further with that one and create this great Venn diagram as Grover talked about, and to see just how far and how creative we can be if we had an infinite amount of time to work all these things out. We probably would solve everything. So I come to this space and leave this space with an excitement about that. In terms of next steps, I feel, and I'm using feel intentionally, that it's important to, as we talk about the conversations and things like that, that we show that this is a model, this is an example of what is out there. But it's not the end all be all. And I think that's important, because I don't want people to think that this is the right way to do it. Because some people are going to have to cry, and some people are going to have to scream, and some people are going to have to cuss, and some people are going to have to lose their religion, and all these other things that come up in the process of discovering who we are. And if those of us who are, at different stages in our journey, we have to work to continue to create space within ourselves to be able to hold that. Because, it's all well and good to say, let's get together and have a living room conversation, which I totally believe in. That's why I'm here. But at the same time, if someone's got part of their process is telling me something that I don't want to hear, if I don't have the capacity to hear what I don't want to hear, then I'm going to go back into that survival instinct myself. And so I want to lift up, I'm going to keep doing this for myself, and I encourage whoever watches this to continue to work on to cultivate space within yourself and to make room for others. And when you hear things you don't want to hear, witness it. I didn't want to hear that. See where it takes you, and see, how much space you can make, because there's room enough for every one of us if we open our hearts enough.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that. And in the interest of time, segue kind of what you just shared, Pedro, into a beautiful expression that came up in a mastermind group that I was in the other day, of looking for the language that other people, we started the conversation talking about find the language you can use that other people can hear. And someone in the group said, what we really should be doing is finding the language that other people can feel. And I just thought that was a really, really beautiful elevation. And a lot of it speaks to ultimately what you just brought up here, Pedro, is that we all have work to do. Even those of us that do bridge building work, we're all always working on ourselves. And I think a lot of that is cultivating that capacity to be able to do that, to continue creating more space in ourselves for our own practice and for other people. And I think two things that came up for me really quickly that I think are important, and there's a lot of common ground, are I loved, Marianne, when you talked about history and how we need more study of that, and we need more civics, and there's lots of efforts working on that that you can look into if any of you are listening. And I also think the desire to have more emotional intelligence training or consciousness aware around what you can do for yourself to kind of continue to elevate the way that you show up and the way that you look at the world. I think those are would serve us well in many of the disagreements and divisions that are out there. And so I think those are some great next action steps, no matter where you are on the political spectrum. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Yeah. In the interest of time, I'll just say that I agree with what everyone said, and I'm just going to close this out tonight. Thank you to all our guests, to Marianne Williamson, to Grover Norquist, to Reverend Pedro Silva, to John Wood Jr., to Amanda, my co-host, for taking the time out of your day, out of your evening, to be here with us and to model what conversations like this can be for others. And, really it's simple. It's just a matter of setting a time and a date and coming to the conversation with an open mind. So we invite everyone who is who's tuning in to join or host a conversation this week and next week. So essentially the week leading up to Election Day and the week after Election Day is part of our 2-week campaign on moving forward together. And you can sign up on using our tech partners platform called Junto. One of our live stream hosts will drop the link, and we'll also be sending a follow-up email with the link. And yeah, we just really encourage everyone to keep this spirit of moving forward together, of imagining a world where we're together in their minds. And yeah, I think we can do this. If anything, these conversations are just something to do while we all wait. And yeah, thank you. Thank you so much again for everyone who tuned in, and to the Living Room Conversations team who helped make this happen. Thanks, everyone. We can just do a wave. Yeah.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks for doing it.
Thank you.